right, Peter.
Hey,
It's been a while.
been a while, man. It's been way too long. We are back. We're back to save the world.
Yes. I mean, honestly, what happened without us? Honestly,
What happened? Look at all the things that have happened
because we haven't got a lot worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah. There's no such thing as correlation. It does equal causation. So yeah, in my book.
Absolutely.
So good to see you. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Yeah, thanks for all of our listeners. I know it's been at least a year. I think it's been a year. Or maybe it's been 8 months. I can't remember. But we made like 31 episodes, and we decided to talk about a book, and we're going to hopefully start doing this again. And anyway, yeah.
You have the hard copy of the book?
Yeah, I do. So
there's
The Boy Crisis. It's pretty big. By Warren Farrell and John Gray. John Gray's a psychologist, and Farrell is, I think he's also a psychologist as well. Is that right?
Yeah, but basically John Gray's portion is just the ADHD chapter. It's part 5.
Okay.
So we'll get to that, but it'll be a while. We can just give a little bit of an overview of our plan. And if this is your first time watching a Sound Engagement episode, you can find all of our previous episodes on YouTube. Most of them are on there. We do have some audio. We've transitioned. We've shifted from. Should be careful about using the word transition, but we shifted from the platform we were using to Substack, and since it's free, we'll be able to upload the audio there as well as keep our YouTube channel open. But anyways, the plan is to do some book reviews. We did a lengthy set of book reviews, or about like 6 parts on cynical theories.
Yes.
I thought as far as helpful content, that's probably those videos are probably good, especially if you're questioning CRT or what the impact that CRT is having, critical race theory is having in our nation, and even within institutions, within churches, within businesses, within politics. But we're going to move away from that and begin to focus on this book, The Boy Crisis, and see where that takes us. I mean, we've got some other ideas. We'd like to maybe do Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. But there's some other, that would be a different genre, than this. But if we stick within this realm, talking about raising boys, being a man, what does that look like? I think just there's a common consensus that and this book confirms that basically we have as a nation put so much emphasis on giving women equal rights that men and boys have been kind of forgotten. Of course, we're not here to say like we're victims and we need to regain our privilege and our power. The point here is just to say like our boys need some models, need some examples, and the men need to have purpose. And so the value here, I think, in going through this is going to be not just, I'm just thinking personally here. I have a 12-year-old boy, almost 13, ready to enter into a very tumultuous age. And I'd like to know how to be a better father, and I'm also a pastor, and I want to be able to shepherd fathers in our church well and encourage them. So why would this book interest you, Peter? I mean, what obviously as you interact with clients probably where this is going to be a factor, but what's your interest in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I really love reading it this far. I mean, I think one of my biggest interests is I teach at Endicott. I see a lot of men are not entering college like they used to, and the book really actually talks about it. I mean, we wanted to address, is there a boy crisis? And we're going to try to make the argument today that there is one. I know that sounds anecdotal. It even sounds somewhat insulting when because in our natural world, at least the world that we're kind of living in today, there's the common anecdote is there's an oppressed versus an oppressor mentality. Cis white males have had power for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. And now it's the minorities' turn and females' turn, and it's about time, and y'all need to kind of take a back seat. And that's basically the whole construct. So any type of like, hey, is there a boy crisis going on? Is, hey, maybe we should address what it's like to be a man. There's usually a pushback because it's like almost insulting. Why are we talking about that now? We already been talking about that. It's almost, I guess it's kind of an equivalent of a guy at a Bible study talking for 2 hours and then somebody talking for 10 minutes. And then he says, oh, I wasn't able to speak. I want to be able to get my point. I mean, that's kind of the way it's come across, I think, in our world. And there's a part that I get that. I totally understand that. But we're not really, I don't think we're going to sit there and argue against that per se. I think we just want to acknowledge, as this book does, that psychologically there is a boy crisis going on, because I think there's an identity crisis, not just with boys, but also with girls. Even the very definition of boys and girls are changing. And the Cambridge definition just redefined their definition of what female is. So we're redefining these terms as well. But men are, I would say, when we say crisis, as the book kind of talks about, they really don't have a sense of purpose. They're lost, and which is leading to more crime, leading to more suicide, leading to more, as we'll talk about today, like just men just wanting to just get super, super big and stocked at the gym and have sex with lots of girls, or, there's a very lost, chaotic element to where boys are going today. So we want to address that. Is what it means to be a man. I have an 8-year-old son myself. I actually have a hard time even defining what is a real man. I think it's going to be a challenge to me in a good way. I did a podcast with Carmen Schober about a year ago, and that was really cool, but it also forced me to do more research on how do I answer that question without being too general. So I'm hoping we both can learn and apply some of the stuff that we're learning here, and then bring our own counseling / pastoral wisdom to the table,
Well, I think both of us probably acknowledge that this book came to my attention, at least. I think it was yours too, but through Jordan Peterson recommending it. And he's done an interview with the author that you can look up and find, and I'm sure it will be helpful. But of course, the difference here is that we want to be a little bit critical as well, to acknowledge where we disagree, and then of course take the information from the book and apply it to our lives. I think that's where a lot of times kind of book reviews and are just that. They're just factual information. But I think where a podcast is helpful is you begin to think about, okay, what does this mean for me? And what might this mean for any future readers of the book? Like how will this book benefit you in your daily life? And how does it affect the way you perceive and view the world? So some of that work is hard to do if you don't have someone else to kind of talk it through with. So I like reading, but if the book just goes back on a shelf, or, if I pass it on, I rarely benefit from it as much as if I actually have a conversation about it. So taking important books, having a conversation with you about it is going to, I think, draw a lot more application from it. So the first thing I wanted to say too is just I think the book has a lot of good research, good graphs. Just getting through the first section of the book, I'm excited to share some of the things that are in there, but there's obviously going to be some things that we disagree with. And, he does present himself as basically getting into this through feminism, right? He talks about how he was a feminist. I think he was hired by Obama's administration, if I can remember from the intro, where he says, like, how did this issue come to my attention? But at that point, he was advocating for equal rights for women and for girls, and basically, I think he's proud of that work, and would say that they did a lot of good things for the nation. But one of the consequences has been that the kind of the pendulum has swung all the way to the other side, so that boys have been overlooked, and there are real consequences that are worth addressing. So he is coming from an egalitarian perspective, where he's saying, look, if we want truly equal rights, then we need to also recognize where the boys have been forgotten. And I can appreciate that. It's sort of a kind of a classic liberal position. I am coming from a different perspective. I'm coming from a complementarian perspective. So I do see we're equal in value, but we have differences in our roles and the purposes for which men and women were created, obviously, ultimately to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But in the way we do that in our daily life, it's going to look different, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean that, so in my opinion, a woman would not ever be called to be the head of her home. Now, when she's single, there's obviously, like, you've got to deal with that. But the ideal, if you're a married person, the husband should be the head. We don't have to necessarily get there, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea of where, from a complementarian perspective, there's going to be clear roles within the home where I might push back on this author and say some things a little differently. But overall, the information, I think, is going to be helpful. And I think some of the things that he's pointing out, one of the things he'll point out is like where men, for instance, like our purpose, we need a new purpose. Well, but if our purpose used to be kind of protect and provide, that might shift into a new era where men can learn to be the nurturer. And I would say that's kind of fighting against some created in the image of God, like some of the ways in which men and women have actually been created with our natural differences.
Yeah.
Right? So some of that is I'm not going to be as keen on, but the idea of becoming more compassionate, able to articulate emotions to my kids and them to articulate them to me, and for me to draw those out, like that might be something that the Stoic man has never really thought was necessary or important. And I think where this book's going to help me is to challenge that. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, I like everything you had to say. I mean, and just to get right in, I mean, he starts, is there really a boy crisis? And, the way he proves it is he does a survey and starts out with basically a survey is that most people, if you were to ask people who want to get pregnant or women who want to get pregnant, which would you prefer, couples as well? And almost 2/3 of them say I'd much rather prefer a girl over a boy. Yes. And then they ask why, and they said it's just going to be a lot easier for her, which is so interesting because 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, we would have said something totally different. And being a father of 2 little girls, I can concur. I think it's going to be easier for my 2 little girls than it will be for Eli. I just do. I think he's going to have different struggles. I'm not saying that they're not there, and people may strongly disagree with me on that. But I think what we're going to cover in here is that women, I think, definitely do have a much stronger support network. A good example of that is like miscarriages. I don't like when there's a miscarriage, there's a huge support network with her. Usually the man is just left alone. In fact, very few people even ask him how he's doing. They're just kind of told to kind of bear through it. But if they get upset, they get mad, they're called toxic, but if they, and so they hold all that in, but if they share too much, they're actually not very attractive to the opposite sex. So I think the biggest crisis I think men are facing today, I think one of the biggest crises is they just don't know where to go. They have all these weird emotions, all these, not weird, but just like these emotions, they don't really know how to land them very well. And so because of the way our testosterone affects our behavior and all these other things, it's genetically, it can feel discombobulating somewhat. And what do we do with the complexity of our own human, intimacy and conduct? Yeah.
Yeah, so, for sure.
I mean, so he just starts out with that. I mean, he starts with basically that almost every man, he says, if you were born today, which would you rather be, a boy or a girl? And he says every man answered a girl, as did 2 or 3 women. So
wild. And then the idea is, I mean, he talks about the fact that men or boys really grow up learning early on to be ashamed of their gender, right?
Yeah.
To be ashamed that they're male. And like the very opening quote that is given there is, I'm sorry, I'm a man. And it's like, that's sort of where we are, that if you're a man, you immediately have to start from a defensive, apologetic posture. And I've been reading this other book. I just finished it, called No Apologies by Anthony Esselin. He's a Catholic kind of social commentator, but really helpful there, because I think it pushes back on that. It's like, man, society needs strong men. And we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We shouldn't apologize for the way we're made, and the advantages that gives us. That doesn't mean we don't have the ability to empathize, right? To recognize and to show sympathy, of course, to our children and to those in pain, our neighbors who are hurting. But it seems like we've gotten to a point where any sign of strength is considered toxic, and you can't. You're trying to
mansplain,
you know,
that's or if you do try to,
you're trying to just have power over others, and it's not going to end well. So I fully agree with you.
Well, and it also says here, dads to be are almost twice as likely to prefer a daughter to a son. Young men between 25 and 31 are 66% more likely than their female counterparts to be living with their parents. Those are kind of his two main points that he's going to kind of build from there, is that it seems like young men are going back home, which makes them highly unattractive to the opposite sex, even toward
failure to launch.
Failure to launch, or failure to thrive, even learned helplessness, you name it. And I'm seeing that more and more clinically, and I mean, if you take that with dads to be they would rather have a girl when the son exits the womb, he's 2/3 of a chance that his father really didn't want this guy. He wanted a girl. So he's already starting out in kind of the wrong place right there. So, then he's going back to the very parents that in the very beginning may not have really even wanted this particular gender. So, but go ahead.
There were a couple of things that before I jump into the next section too, is he talks about, the challenges of failure to launch, boys who just stay basically in their parents' home, and then they become crippled really to find a partner, because they, for one, are having a hard time finding a job that will be adequate for them to go and buy a home. And so single men are buying homes in urban areas at or single women are buying homes 2.5 times more than single men. That's just in urban environments. But I thought that was a fascinating statistic, because it just shows how crippling it would be if you're staying at home, you're unable to find work that will allow you to find a job work that will allow you to have the income you need to get a home, and then to find a spouse in that situation is almost impossible, right? No one wants to date someone who can't afford to pay that first bill, and you're asking about splitting the check or something like that. And he gives statistics for that, like 87% of men still feel the obligation to pay for the full bill on a first date, and women, it's something like 78%. So it's clearly like just the overall overwhelming obligation. And I don't have any problem with that. Actually, I kind of agree, but you see the tension there of someone who's making less, who's stuck at home, who doesn't have and there's
been an inverse too. And you could maybe even show the graph. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but like most men are not entering college, and 66% of women are now entering college, and only 37% of men are entering college, which is a complete inverse of 1960.
Yes, I will show that.
Yeah,
so the last thing I wanted to say with that in that intro section was just the idea. I really like the concept of the Iroquois where a man should be thinking 7 generations ahead. That was kind of a powerful image, just to illustration to think through, to go, okay, what am I doing to impact 7 generations down the line? What am I leaving with my kids with physically? How am I training them up emotionally? How am I preparing them for life so that they can pass on these values and traditions to their kids, so that, they're strong enough? Like they're going to have to be pretty strong traditions and foundations to last that long. And I thought that was a helpful way of thinking about it. So many of like American mindset is just sort of Western mindset is just, we're individuals and we think about ourselves and really nothing beyond ourselves, not even our own kids. So.
Right. So maybe, that's
let me pull. Go ahead.
Let's go ahead and so he breaks it down. Y'all could read more on his personal journey and how he, saw that. And one last thing that he made in the introduction is, or at one point is, telling your kids, anticipating, quote, the end of men is not exactly an inspiration for your young son's life journey. So all of those main points that he has, that dads to be everyone's twice as likely to prefer a daughter. Young men between 25 and 31 are 66 more likely than their female to live with their parents. And the whole message that they're basically receiving is you're toxic and that we need to end you. Maybe not directly, but indirectly in so many ways. And that when you display masculine traits, it's often seen in a purely negative light. And so they don't know where to go. That's kind of where we are. The other thing I would like to tell our readers too is, our listeners, a really good book, if you want to follow up on that, is Raising Cain by Michael Thompson. And he talks a lot about that. And you can actually watch the YouTube movie called Raising Cain, not with John Lithgow, which is a horror film in the 1980s, but this is it's basically young boys and just how lost they are educationally. And so even in school, school is primarily driven to benefit girls more so than boys. Even with the diagnosis of like ADD, more little boys are being diagnosed with that, significantly much more than girls, primarily because their bottoms are thinner and they look more squirmy. And we've gotten rid of recess, which have drastically affected little boys' behavior. Such a huge effect, especially on young kindergartners up until 5th grade. We've either gotten rid of recess or we've brought it down to only maybe 10 minutes a day. And even with recess, there's a coddling that goes on. There's really no risk taking that's going on in recess anymore. Even when you go to the park, boys really do learn through improvisation. They learn through that whole kinesthetic, hands-on experience significantly more so than girls. Girls learn a lot more mentally, which is why they mature quicker, usually emotionally, than boys do. Boys have to feel it, touch it, they have to use their bodies. And so when you kill recess, you're actually preventing them from learning in their fullest potential and educate in elementary school. So it's a huge crisis. Like, we're in a real crisis. And I would even say, like, Christian men, Christian men, we're seeing that today with just all the false doctrines that are coming out. The passivity of the American church is both baffling and heart-wrenching, honestly, and something that we really, need to address. So going on, he has 6. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Please.
Just two things that I think are going to come back around multiple times in the as we work our way through the book, because one of them, I thought it would be good to just share it here from the beginning. Yeah. One of them is this. I have found that the most important single tool you can give your son is a once or twice weekly family dinner. And I put that on Twitter and was commenting that, once or twice weekly is probably not enough, but and then adding family worship would make it all the more meaningful and impactful. But as I looked at the book and actually read the appendix, he isn't suggesting it's just having a meal, but it's actually very intentional conversation at the table that he says set aside 90 minutes to do.
Wow.
So we'll get into that later. But I thought I do like the fact that this is sort of becoming, I think there was even a New York Times article about how the loss of the family dinner has had a devastating impact upon, upon our culture. And man,
right.
It's
just, And I know I have so much to say about that. Did you want to talk about, just go through, if you want to display, because he has
just keep it up there.
6 different. Yeah, maybe we could try to get rid of the tabs on the table.
Yeah, I had it up there just so you could see where I am
nice.
in the book. But like this one particular, if he cannot articulate what scares him, and this is the boy, right, your son, if he cannot articulate what scares him, he may withdraw into video games and video porn and develop a virtual life to mask his depression. That was the other point I wanted to make, just to say, and I'll try to get rid of the tabs here now, but being able to articulate what scares him. I thought there's as far as that being the primary influence of whether a boy becomes addicted to porn and video games, that there's obviously a lot of factors there, but the ability to articulate what scares him is deep to think about. I know I couldn't do that as a boy. I didn't tell people that. And even as a man, I have a hard time telling people that, right? To acknowledge what it is that you're afraid of, like deep down. That seems to get at root issues when you can say, like, what is the surface sin issue that you're dealing with? There's some level of fear that is probably at the root of that, like a fear that you're holding on to or that you're not. And does that make sense? I think a fear is it's complicated, because in Christianity, right, there's a good fear of the Lord that leads, that's the beginning of wisdom. But then there's also a fear that causes us to flee and isolate from the Lord and hide. It's Adam and Eve hiding in the garden. And he says, "Where are you?" And God says, "Where are you?" Not like God didn't know where they were, but he wanted them to be able to articulate what was causing them to hide. That's powerful, in my opinion.
It is very powerful. I don't know if you could scroll down a little bit so we could see the quote a little bit more.
Yeah, I got to just go to the next page.
Oh, okay. If you cannot articulate what scares him, he may withdraw into video games and porn and develop a virtual life to mask his depression. Well, see, I mean, that's something that I'm seeing clinically a lot more. I mean, in the sense of their erectile dysfunction is a lot more common with people who are under the age of 30. I think it's risen. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's huge. And so like I'm starting, I'm learning of cases or hearing about cases where guys are already having ED by the time they're 21, 22, because it's a real problem. Because what porn addiction does is that it affects your desire for intimacy. So when he's actually touching or holding somebody that he's loving, he can't get an erection. He can't actually be intimate with his loved one or his wife, and it's you really shouldn't even be having that diagnosis until you're in your late 50s. And so it's, he's becoming sexless in a lot of ways, which isn't good. And there is something, and what the video and the porn and the electronics do for boys is that it compensates. It does a very, very bad job, and it does a very good job. And because it does a very good job at distracting him. It does a bad job at not feeding the primary, need inside, that he has to find some sense of purpose. So he has he's very lost. But yeah, I would 100% agree with that. So men are much more likely to develop that, and boys get so distracted in that world, so they build their own little virtual reality. And there's a lot of boys that are into they're just completely addicted to both pornography and sex addictions and you name it, and yet they have nowhere to go. They just continue to spiral in those places. And I think it's sad, because a lot of that actually does have to do with feminism in a lot of ways. I mean, feminism, you know, and unhealthy masculinity. I mean, I would say both. I'm not going to just pick on feminism. I definitely think there's been some real unhealthy masculinity, masculine doctrines that have really done some damage in the church. We don't have to talk about that now, but you know, I think men are they're lost on how to love, how to romance, how to be tender and strong at the same time. They don't really know that balance, and so when they're trying to engage with their partners, their wives are not always the most turned on, because they don't know how to play that balance very well. They are either way too aggressive sexually, or they just a doormat. They don't even pursue at all, and so it's a real problem. It's we're seeing it a lot more, and so. So
what do you, I just want to ask you to follow up on that, because I think that's right. But what do you, there's a little bit of a responsibility for men, right, as fathers, to deal with their own inability to be emotionally in tune, and then to use that to train up and coach their son, or to parent their son to also be able to articulate what scares them, as Warren, what is it? Warren Farrell is suggesting. So right. I mean, is that true, or is it just simply a matter of like teaching them a few tricks? You know what I mean? Like this isn't just something that's going to change overnight, right? This is something that you're going to have to work on for years yourself, and then to be able to be in a place where you can actually parent your son to deal with it. Not that you would ignore their frustrations and pains, but like those addictions aren't just going to go away without serious like shifts in their pattern of life. Not just their world.
Yeah. I mean, sex addiction, if I could just because that's probably where I have the most specialty in. I mean, I don't not so much substance abuse is you center in a lot more with intimacy. So it's like getting them used to intimacy and like true intimacy. A lot of guys that are addicted to that stuff, I mean, they really don't know what real intimacy looks like. And there's a number of reasons for that. It could be like a dad that just is, shut up and just do your work, just bear through it. And there's a time and place where he has to build some resilience and whatnot. But it could also be what I'm seeing more. It's the Oedipal mother, the overprotective mother that does everything for the child. I would say that's a lot more common in today's mindset than it was like, the guy that's saying, go get tough. I think that was true maybe in the 80s and the 70s. Sure. I don't see that at all anymore clinically. I understand I'm in a very liberal state. It might not be true in Mississippi where we did grad school, but I probably see the very incompetent male who doesn't know what to do with his feelings more so from the Oedipal mother, or the Oedipal mother, however you want to pronounce that, because she does all the work for him. And so when he's distraught, she'll coddle. When he's angry, she'll try to calm him down, even though when he's being really insulting, and she'll excuse for him rather than letting him be responsible for himself. Because here's the thing about a lot of guys, especially abusive men, they're very, very good at being victims. They're very good at like living off. That's actually why I don't like anti-racism. It's, not to talk about all that. That's the number one reason why I don't like CRT, is because it teaches abusive men basically to hide behind their victim status. It's the mindset of an abuser. It's just toward the oppressed class. But it's not creating strong men. It's big. Every single man that I've ever seen that had a problem with abusing, they were themselves victims of some type of abuse, but they hide there, and they want to stay there. And usually, they find females in their lives that will feel empowered to take that excuse to the next level so that they can be the savior. And so they, men really do learn through consequences in a good way. We learn through risk taking. We learn through in the playground by picking on somebody that's much bigger than us and getting beaten up, and then saying, "Oh shoot, yeah, probably shouldn't fight that guy." We learn through those things. We learn through, play. We learn through our mistakes so much more than our successes. So, the coddling is really drastically affecting men because their egos are so disoriented anyway when they're really young, and it's kind of obnoxious when you're a teenage boy. When you're 13 and 14, you really are very grandiose, and so you have to lose, and you have to take tons of risks, and you have to fail, which the Oedipal mother is extremely uncomfortable with because her baby can't fail. And so I probably, I don't know if that answers the question, but
that's good. Yeah. I mean, I like I said, I'm sure these topics are going to come up regularly, but these are just sort of the foundational, themes that the author addresses in the introduction. So I feel like just personally, that's going to have a big impact on my own parenting and what I think about my son needing most. There's going to be an emotional intelligence there that I'll benefit from a book like this that I don't think you're going to get from, from certain kinds of literature, right? Where it's just about empower, like just making sure that the boy can stuff his emotions and not deal with the real pain. And I don't know how that's certainly the caricature of literature, or of the male, the toxic male, toxic masculinity. I'm not sure how much that's encouraged, but it definitely, there's some truth to that, right? This sort of stoic approach to life where you just don't let your emotions impact anything. And actually the book does address that. And it suggests that was helpful when we had to train up our boys to go to war, and if they were too attached to family, too attached emotionally, they weren't willing to leave. Right. And then they wouldn't be willing to give their life. So there's this sense of like, we have, this has become inculcated into the male species, if you will. And there's this sense of, we've got to stay emotionally detached throughout life if we're really going to live up to the role that we have. And that gets into his whole heroic idea. Like, who do we make into heroes? It's the warrior. It's the one who sacrifices himself, who gives his life for his country or for his family. And trying to give a different perspective to men is one of the things the author is going to do. But man, I got to say, there's part of me still that's like, yeah, those should be our heroes, right? I mean, the ones who are willing to sacrifice, that indicates something deep inside that's natural to us, that especially for those who are believers, who are united to Christ, there's a sacrificial aspect that we should have, that we're willing to give up everything for. Right? I don't, that'll, like I said, come up again, but there was getting into this first chapter. I don't know if you wanted to say this is the mental health crisis that boys have already kind of been talking about it. So I don't think we need to spend a ton of time there, but just he does draw our attention to the idea that men are the primary ones committing suicide. Boys are the ones, and the statistic is getting worse, right? As they get older.
And there's a great graph on page 16.
Yeah, you want me to pull that up?
Yeah, that actually would be great. That's a really good graph. Yeah. There's one of them. There's the prison population. There it is. Yeah. So the connection between masculinity and suicide, and look at how much it's risen. The white is going to be the girls, and the boy, and that's, I will say this, more women attempt suicide though, FYI. But old men, quote, succeed at suicide, mainly because of the means. So it's a much more violent means. I don't know if he mentions that or not, but that's they're even, I will say that more women are still attempting than men, sadly. But more men are dying.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, women often attempt through pills, and they could often catch it on time pretty quickly with overdosing, whatnot. So, if somebody comes into our emergency room and she's overdosed on pills, we could usually, well, not we, but the hospital can address that pretty quickly, and she could be discharged, like just after that. But men are usually using like shotguns or jumping off bridges, like much more violent. So that's true. Much more men are dying. But the other thing is that, I don't know if you want to bring up that graph, much more men are going to prison, mainly for violent crime. And I think it's increased just from 1970s, by 800%? I forgot his actual, it's a lot. So
700%.
700%. Yeah. Which is a lot.
That's not good. And 93% male. So, this is another aspect, and I'm sure you picked up on it too. He's got a little bit of a soft spot for social justice. He talks about, kind of the black male versus, but he says like oftentimes we just think of the race and not the gender. We're not thinking of male, female. And yet he's like a cop is more likely to shoot a male than a female. Part of that brings me back to kind of some of the Thomas Sowell's arguments, right? There's like, well, okay, but if you're the more violent individual, of course you're going to be more inclined.
Yeah, his argument there is pretty poor. I mean, because usually the men that are being shot by cops, they have guns themselves and they're shooting. Right. Yes. And so yes, that's why they're dying. It's not like, selling a joint on the, corner and, wearing a hookah and a cop just looks at him and just starts shooting at him. I mean, that's what's not kind of being said. I mean, these are very, very violent criminals. These are people, like Jacob Blake, he has a knife and he's coming at a cop, going in and saying that's a perfect, don't carry a knife inside of a house when a police officer is there. Don't run after a police officer with a gun. Don't try to attack an officer with a gun. So yeah, I still don't buy that argument. But anyway, more men are dying.
The statistics are true.
Yeah. But nevertheless, but I will say the violent crimes, Jordan Peterson does make a really interesting point that our society thankfully does see, violent crimes as horrific and everything else. But what we haven't done is seen how women can be violent as well in very, very different ways. But women are violent or psychologically much more there can be more damage, but there are no real crimes when those are committed. So women are they have a tendency to have more, display more psychological abuse or, So not that we have to get into all those things, but 93% of men, and that's in what, 2013. So it's almost 10 years old, those stats. Yeah. So we don't know where they are now.
Probably not much different, but or just continuing in the trend. But it is, there was a huge news just a couple days ago, I think. What is his name? Twitch, the dancer. Did you hear about him committing suicide?
Oh, right. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, young 40-year-old, very popular TikTok and YouTube channel. I don't know if he had YouTube, but he would do these dances because he and his wife met on So You Think You Can Dance, and then they also went on Dancing with the Stars. They were coaches on that, and he ended up becoming the DJ for Ellen DeGeneres' show.
Right. Yes.
And so he's got he had a big following, and just from all appearances on everything he ever shared, very happy individual, and just shot himself in a hotel room a couple days ago. After his I think it was his 9th-year wedding anniversary. So a couple days after that. So his wife is Allison, also a dancer, but just like this concept, this idea is pretty much before us regularly. Where people who you just would never know on the outside are going through tremendous pain and torment, and they're just hiding it. So I think
it happened. I mean, I don't mind saying this. Like, I don't think it happened in our seminary. I don't know if you were there when I arrived in seminary in 2006. There was a young man who took his own life, sadly, Christian man, And I was the one that actually took his room. He was supposed to be in my room, or maybe my roommate. I can't remember, but he was engaged, and Ligon did his funeral, and it's real in the church, and and you love the Lord, and but nobody saw it. Nobody saw the depression. Nobody saw the despair. The famous hymn writer William Cooper, I know, it was hundreds of years ago, but still, I think men carry a load, and I think men, especially when, later in life, we tend to isolate, we tend to hide, we tend to be very guarded. I want to go back on the emotional piece because, men are actually, there's a myth that says women are more emotional than men. And this is the myth that Michael Thompson addresses in his documentary, Raising Cain. They did a survey where, they had a control group, an experimental group, and moms who showed no emotion to their girls, their daughters, and then just kind of ignored them and just walked out of the room. When they did it to their little girls, the girls would start crying and then just kind of like whatever and start like self-soothing. Most of them did. When they did it to their little boys, the boys were much more affected by the mirror neurons that weren't the lack of mirror neurons from their mothers. They were actually a lot more emotional than the little girls were. And when they've done brain scans on little boys, there's actually a lot more emotion going on. But the thing with boys is that they tend to be more biased toward emotions. They're actually more emotional than girls. Girls actually can, so when they're flooding, so females are actually much, much better if they get really, like your wife, if you guys get in an intense argument, she's actually pretty calm in about 10 minutes. You and I are not. We hold on to it for at least an hour before we can talk again, because it takes us a while to actually deflood fully. And that's a John Gottman study. So whenever men actually take longer to get to a point where they're physiologically at a good place than women are actually, okay, let's go. Let's get back to work. So that's one of the big misconceptions. Boys are actually not less emotional than girls. Boys are actually more. And that's what's I think so confusing, but we're very good at selective attention, and we're very, very good at being very biased toward emotions, which explains why men are usually bias themselves toward anger, sex, or let's party. And they do that really, really, really intensely, at least unhealthy guys. They either do one of those things really, really well, but which isn't good because there's not a balance there. But if you take females, you don't usually get a girl that's just only into anger or only sexual or only into partying. I mean, yes, there are girls that do all three of those things or apply those, but usually you get more balance with females. They could like go home, be very tender to their kids, and then maybe party at the night. Boys have a tendency to just think on that one small task and put all of their emotions there. So it's a big misconception that boys are somehow less emotional than girls. They're actually much more emotional. But and I think that's
their ability. Is it that their ability to handle the emotions is not as sophisticated as the girl naturally, or
well, they're not taught emotional, how to handle. Yeah, well, they don't often have emotional intelligence. We don't necessarily attune to them, which is, I think, is what the book prepares us for. And so they stuff it. They have a tendency to stuff it. They're often being told to stuff it. Well, at least again, that's kind of old school.
Boys don't cry.
Yeah, boys don't cry. Nowadays, like I already said about the Oedipal mother, that's kind of being replaced with just like, replacement therapy. I guess not therapy, but parents replacing the emotion on what they should have. It's so yeah, but it's good to recognize that. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of complexity there.
Yeah, and that whole mental health component will be, I'm sure, helpful for us to think through as we continue to make through, at least as we recognize some of the arguments the author's going to give. But
what do you see as a pastor? If I can ask you real quick, I don't mind. Yeah, we could do a back and forth with you. I'm just curious, as a pastor of your church, how many people go to your church again? Is like 40,000, 50,000 people go to your church.
How many people are in my church? No, we're massive mega church. We've got a couple families that
nice.
Yeah. But what are you asking? Just as far as how are the men and boys?
Yeah, are you seeing mental health crisis amongst your own? Anyway, just be
good question. No, so I think it's there, but I think what is challenging is getting people to admit it, and that's that's always the challenge, because in I think as a pastor, they're coming to hear me preach and teach, and they're not necessarily thinking about it as from a counseling perspective as much anymore. Now, at least that's not in my context. Maybe in other churches, their pastor much more is viewed as like a counselor that they could come to and regularly seek help. I would say I generally get this kind of topic coming up when I go out with a guy for coffee, or a father or a husband, or even a single guy in our church. I'll ask how they're doing. And these are the kinds of, like, how are you doing emotionally? How, like, I want to kind of get deeper with someone in those conversations. I kind of have to pry it out of people, though, because I do think there's a tendency to just, I'm fine. I'm good. I've got it all together. And yet, that's just not true. There's challenges that they're facing just like I am. And at least to know that there's someone that they're, talking to, that they have support. It doesn't always have to be me that they're coming to, right? But do you have good friends that you're speaking about when, hey, man, you lost your job, a month ago? How are you doing? Have you found meaningful work? Are you looking? A lot of times it's almost debilitating when people go through, when men go through these crises in their lives. They just isolate from the church. They isolate from the very thing that can help support them, or from their friends who they need to be kind of talking this through with. So I would say it's absolutely impacting it. I wish I had more tools to do a better job. Right. And that's why I think that, like, this book is going to be helpful in that regard, to be able to ask the right questions and maybe to challenge and encourage the right approach to challenges with your son at home. But in the next chapter, I don't know if you want to move on. We're running up on the hour, so I don't want to go too far beyond that, but maybe we can just hit on physical health, and then we'll pick up chapter 3 next time.
I mean, I did like the chapter 4 because I felt like it accumulated everything we're talking about. I don't know if you wanted to. I mean, the physical health is great, but we could.
Well, let me just show you. I had to at least show this one thing.
Sure.
This idea of bigorexia.
Oh my gosh, is that a real picture?
Is that crazy?
Is that real? That's real.
That is real.
Oh my gosh, I thought that.
And you can look up this concept of bigorexia or bigorexic. It is wild how just deformed bodies look when they get addicted to the gym, addicted to exercise. And I think I was doing my own research on this because I've gotten into going to the gym. This is your opportunity to talk about your particular appreciation for CrossFit. Okay. But like,
I actually don't do it really anymore. I'm now running and jujitsu and going to the Y. So I'm just like a normal guy now, Brad. Yeah, I'm not going to CrossFit every. Yeah,
well, I was surprised to find out. I used to run. That was the easiest thing for me, was to run. I was surprised though that addiction addiction to exercise is most common in marathoners, triathletes, and runners. Now, to the degree of 2 to 3 to 4 times as much as like gym rats.
What type of addiction? Like gym addiction or like muscle? Like what type of
people
addiction?
Where it's like a controlling. I think there would. I didn't read the what level of addiction meant, but there's a where you're just like, even when it's hurting you, you're going to go out and run. Even when it's when you're the weather's the worst possible weather, you're going to get out there and you're going to hurt yourself, right? That kind of addiction, most common in kind of endurance athletes, people who are into running. And I think there's, that's something to explore. Is obviously exercise is good, but we need to have the ability to balance it. And so this, just the physical health component he draws out to say men tend to put themselves in more dangerous kind of position. So
and he calls it bigorexia instead of bigorexia and
bigorexia. Yeah,
bigorexia. So women often struggle with anorexia. Men will bigorexia or obesity. Yeah. Which is
and just even the death professions. He talked about how 92% of death professions are male dominated. So which because we idolize those professions. And like not again, I don't know that that's such a bad thing. Like I don't want I'd rather have my son in a dangerous job than my daughter. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think he is more capable of doing that job well. You know, like welding, bridge welders, like underwater welders, very dangerous, but like it's just not a profession that very many women enter into. And so like, anyways, we don't have to get into that because I do, if you want to jump ahead to chapter,
I want to respect, but at the same time, we don't have to rush or anything. We could pick that up next week. I mean, I just really liked just the whole dropout, left out cycle, because it does kind of summarize really well on everything that we're saying. And, it, especially with where marriage is scarce and how that's affected fathers. I think it's on page 30. Maybe we could just end on that. So it's like the dropout, left out cycle. And I think this is a really insightful observation because I see this a lot. And this is exactly where men are. It's in neighborhoods. I'll just read it. Or if you want to bring it up, I think it's on page 30. But
is it the graph?
No, it's 4 points. He has the dropout, left out cycle.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I thought that was really good. It was a very good summary on everything that we've talked about, like the boys not finishing school, where that leaves them, the lack of attraction from females. But number one, he says in neighborhoods where marriage is scarce, fathers are scarce, and more than half of boys didn't finish high school. The boy drops out. That's the first point. This is happening across the country. A lot of boys are dropping out. Number two, the less education a young man has, the more likely he's to be unemployed or underemployed, and he's left out of the workplace. Number three, women who desire children think of an uneducated man as undesirable. So where does that leave him? If most men are not entering the workforce, and even now, it's even so much worse since the pandemic. What is it, 16 million or something like that? Men are still not working or something. It's crazy. And an unemployed man is, quote, a lot of women will see them as in another child. And there's a lot of contempt already in the relationship, hardly marriage material. He's left out of marriage and fathering. So that furthers his isolation. And then number four, some of the women with whom he nonetheless has sex become pregnant and raise children without him. So maybe he gets somebody pregnant, but they're realizing, I really don't want this guy living with me. And so we're back to step one, step one. He's the left out dad and the dropout son. And that, I would say that's a pretty accurate picture. And where we are now, with a lot of men. A generalization, I understand there are exceptions to the rule, but that's why we're in crisis right now. That's the cycle. A lot less men are entering ministry. Ministry. The workforce, men are dropping out. Men are much more addicted to, some very unhealthy habits, which makes them also very undesirable. They're also being told that they're toxic. Again, and we're not doing this because we're like, oh, poor us, poor me. I think we're, I don't feel that way as a man. I mean, I've got a very supportive wife. I know you do as well. We're not necessarily speaking from personal experience per se. I mean, there have been times, some of this is personal experience, but I think we're just making a generalization on the boy crisis that's going on in our country and how we can address it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I for whatever reason, lost access to my, to pulling up the tab, but I think I can do it on, or pulling up the app. I think I can pull it up as a tab in, yes. So let me pull that section up. And I know you just spent time reading it, but it might be good for people who are watching it to see it.
Oh, right.
Actually, let me see. I thought oh no, that's not it. Share screen. Okay. I thought this graph was helpful too. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is at the beginning of the dropout, left out. I think that was one of the things I wanted to highlight was just
it's like the complete inverse. Look at that, 61, 39, 30, 61, 39.
Yeah, if you
since 1981. So
right.
Going on 41 years, 42 years, going on 42.
Percentage of college graduates. Wow. It used to be 61% male, 39% female. It's complete opposite now.
Yeah. Now, and this is 2020. I don't know what it is in 2020, about to be 2023. It's probably risen more.
It's about the same to my knowledge because I have two daughters now in college, and in one case, I think it's 60-40 student body split. Okay. And in the other one, it's a little bit higher on the male. So Grove City College has a little more men. And then Samford has something like a 60-40 split. So it's kind of, I mean, and these are conservative Christian colleges. So if it's that way there, I would say in the nationwide averages, it's probably even slightly worse.
My one challenge, though, I don't know if college degrees. I mean, I'm a big fan of what's the guy that Dirty Jobs? What's his name again? I forget. Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember, but yes,
Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe.
There you go.
So he does have to challenge this though. I don't know if the litmus test is college degrees. As much as a good trade. I would, I think of a man, I would love to see him go, offer a little bit more nuance on that, because there are a lot of guys I know who never went to college, but they're making a heck of a lot more money than some doctors and lawyers I know, and they're plumbers and they're electricians, which is fantastic. I don't know if you really have to get a 4-year degree to, quote, fulfill your manhood, but it goes back to the whole sense of purpose. And I think what he's really addressing is that if this is a general consensus, which is what that cycle, brings out. I think you were just on that page, but that you
want me to pull it back up?
Yeah. So that cycle, that 4 points, I think that's a general consensus of all the other men in our country. So if you look at the dropout, left out cycle, so if you all could read that on your own.
For some reason, it doesn't allow me to. It's not allowing me to.
The highlight
to make it just one screen, but
that's okay.
You can kind of see the first 2 points there, and then the next two are right here.
So I mean, and that is true. Women who, the uneducated man is, for a lot of women, is just not very desirable. And I would probably specify the uneducated man there is not a guy that's like a really good plumber or an electrician or whatnot. I think it's just somebody that hasn't really taken a proper risks in his life. He's not making any money. He's not thriving in his company. He's not, moving forward. He's not moving ahead. He has no drive. He has very little incentive. And so, that's where he's at. He's very lost. So
this is the catch-22 we were talking about, where it's just hard to know how to move forward and what advice to give when people are in these situations. But I think that I think there's a lot we'll have to learn from this book. I'm excited. It's already a little past an hour, so I'm kind of thinking we should move toward wrapping it up, and we'll pick up in
2 weeks. Hopefully
chapter 5. And there's actually not a whole lot to chapters 5, 6, and then the next part. So
we can just start talking about the purpose part, but
actually, I'm fine with just skipping those, because if you're interested in reading the book, you can pick up on chapter 5 is on just the fact that he recognizes this isn't just an American problem. It's not just a Western problem. It's a global issue. It's a global crisis, and that 50% males are 50% more likely worldwide to fail at basic proficiency levels in reading, math, and science. So this is not just a problem in our nation. And then the next chapter has to do with being, as a culture, why are we blind to the crisis? Why do we ignore it? And that's when he brings up kind of the idea that we're focused on other social justice issues, and we're not necessarily thinking about the maybe because feminism has become just sort of the language of the land, that there's a hesitancy to acknowledge that it's a boy crisis, that there's problems that men are facing, and it has little to do with race in a lot of those situations. So I think the whole part 2 is actually just a summary, it felt like, of part 1 of the 6 chapters. So kind of acknowledging that there's a problem with there's problems that are created by the solutions that have been implemented. So some of the way we've handled marriage and divorce in the past has created a crisis for boys and men, in the sense of, anything about a divorce, who gets the kids, the default is that women get the kid. And so therefore they're not going to have a father growing up, at least not a very involved one. So that creates a problem. Then you have this sense of purpose that he talked about, how there's a, they had a purpose to go out and be the provider, but now that women are getting more equal like opportunities in the workforce, men are it's obviously having an impact on them. And so this sense of purpose, what can they do? Can the men be the stay-at-home dad, I guess, or can they be the nurturer type? And so again, I'm not going to say I agree with everything that's recommended here, but these are the problems that are created that he's going to address in the book. And then that whole heroic versus health intelligence, and the impact of ADHD. So those are the problems that he addresses in part 2. It's a very short chapter there. And we'll pick up in part 3 next time. Any closing thoughts that you have before?
I was thinking about, like, how would you define man? I mean, I have my own definition of it. I would, I mainly, it was something that I came up with when I was talking to Carmen. I would love to hear. Maybe we should just tell our listeners. I mean, that's a hard, if somebody says, what is a man?
It's an adult male.
It's an adult. The next Y chromosome. Okay.
I mean, I do think a man needs to be able to. I like the whole provide, protect.
I do too.
As a natural instinct that men have. Now it can certainly have an impact in there. Like the culture can have an impact on how we perceive that. But I do think it's natural. I mean, you watch your boy from a young age, and there is a sense of, like, I'm going to, they take a little bit of a leadership role in situations. I don't know. There's various personalities, but I just think as you're maturing, you'll have a better ability to, to lead with strength, and also not to just overpower people, not to lord it over those that you love. But there is a natural desire to provide and protect for your loved ones. And I think there's a expansion of that to, we're not going to get into this here, but this whole concept of nationalism, I do think there's a connection there to the way you think of your countrymen, your the people that you live in a nation with, and certainly with your brothers and sisters in Christ within your church. There is a natural affection and a desire to provide and protect for those that you love. And hopefully we learn there's kind of spheres of your ability to influence and have an impact and lead others. Obviously that's going to start in the home, and it goes out into your community to whatever level of influence you have, depending on your role in life. But in terms of what's the difference between a man and a woman, I
mean, there's a lot of differences. I will say, I just read the book of Job and I love reading that book, but God says to Job, gird yourself up like a man. And there's God says to Job, be a man, gird yourself up, man.
Good point. Yeah.
It's just like, and what does that mean? How can we dissect that? and yeah, and
What did you end up telling Carmen?
yeah, they almost sounded like it was a setup so I could talk about myself. That's when I realized it was, which wasn't the case that time. I have been guilty of that before.
Well, you didn't prepare me for that question, so
right,
I may have to come back next time and talk about what is a man.
Yeah, let's make Brad fail so I can talk about this. No, I was watching a documentary right before I met with Carmen, and there was a lion, and male lions will kind of hit their cubs, not in an aggressive way whenever sometimes, I mean, from a lion way, I guess, from a human perspective, it certainly looks aggressive. But when he finds food, he eats all of it. The females and the babies need to find their own food. He eats all the food, and he's lazy. He's just a lazy lion. It looks lazy. It looks like that from the outside. He sleeps all day and everything else. And, he's not very polite. And what they noticed is that the reason why he eats so much food and sleeps so much is because he's protecting his tribe. He's saving his enemy, because when another male lion comes in, he's wanting to kill that male lion so that he can kill all of his children and have sex with all of his wives. Now, obviously, we're not lions, but what we are called to do as men in our own personal way, because one of the things I don't like in some conservative circles, they kind of do this, like you have to be, you have to be a man's man, you have to be aggressive. Like, there are people that are just I know them in my lives who are wonderful, godly men who are just not that way. They're very, very passive. They're very conflict avoided. They're not loud. They're not aggressive at all. They are very timid. But what we're all called to do as men, regardless of your personality trait, is to be like that male lion in the sense of preserving your energy so that you could be aware of danger coming in and wanting to rob you, your family, and your church. And that is our job. We should be the ones that are saying, wait, no, let's. And I think the main reason for that is because men, thankfully, so we don't have a maternalistic instinct, which is a good thing and a bad thing, which I think is the reason why we're not always emotionally intelligent. That's a bad thing. But I think it's a good thing, because the problem with empathy is that empathy can rob you of true judgment. And I've seen it, because empathy is not a virtuous or unvirtuous emotion. It could actually cloud you into doing really destructive things. And so what men need to do is, yes, have empathy, but not let it flood them, because they need to be able to see danger really, really well. And every man, in my opinion, has to develop that skill to be discerning enough, regardless of their personality trait, to call that out, especially in their churches. That's what we're really called to do as men. We have to call this out. We can't be cowards, and yet, we do it in a way that is godly, that's patient, that's appropriate. Right. But we're like that male lion, it's in the sense that we're waiting and waiting, because something may come in, and we have to be willing in our own way to protect and to call that out, and to see the danger when it arises. And if men don't have that as a goal, they just get lost, and I see it. And it's sad, because you could tell they're wanting that in some form, just something. And because they don't have it, I think that explains a lot of why they get lost in the porn, explains why they're becoming so passive, explains why they're, buying into Marxist ideology that's just rooted in empathy, but it's highly destructive. And, it's just, we need men again.
Do you think it's just a matter of, do you think it's just a matter of encouraging that in one another, like you're saying, calling it out when you see someone being passive, where they need to be more, carry themselves with some integrity and some strength? Or is it a matter of just saying, are there approaches that you can do as a community that would encourage it or foster it, other than the male camaraderie?
Well, I think it all comes down to risk taking. We have to challenge our men to take more risks, because that's how they learn, and if they don't, they have less autonomy, and they struggle more with shame and doubt. It's Eric Erickson's whole point. Like, first you start out with trust versus mistrust, and then autonomy versus shame and doubt, and then a sense of, taking a risk versus guilt. And if we don't, I think men especially, we need to build a sense of good autonomy, not ungodly, you get what I'm saying? Just like being able to go out there. And I even saw that in seminary, men are just very, very passive at times. They would get very, very sensitive if they get like a B, you know who I'm talking about. And just like, they don't want to take a certain class by Dr. Ireland because they may get a, B+, and they're trying to anyway, sorry
Dr.
guys.
Ireland. Yes.
Velvet Hammer, man. But I learned a lot. No, I think we have to cultivate risk-taking in a really good way. Like, that's how we overcome our fears. Men are, we are afraid. We are more emotional. And so we have to, and that's just so interesting because the most violent men are not in touch with their chaotic self. And Jordan Peterson talks about that. It's like, you better know who you are. You have to know your ability to be really harmful and be in touch with that you can do a lot of harm if you're not careful, especially as a man. And I think men in general need to really be aware of that so that they can have the capability to protect, and they have to go deeper.
Just to kind of throw in a little bit too, to tweak maybe we're thinking about it right along the same lines, but that idea of protect would also include that spiritual protection, right? So the ability to lead your home, to lead your son, to lead your daughter, to lead your spouse, your wife. These are things that men need to be challenged and encouraged to participate in. Like, I don't see that happening in the broader evangelical world. There tends to be almost even a downplaying of the value of kind of leading in the home because it just doesn't sound very politically correct anymore. But it's like, man, if you have a father who is practicing regular family worship, who's catechizing his kids, who's reading the Bible and praying with his wife, you are going to absolutely be protecting their spiritual nourishment and their development and facilitating for them an ability to have a well-rounded perspective. I mean, the Bible is obviously, we've got to bring it back to that as believers. Like, it's not just a generic protective quality. Like, we need to do this spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And wherever we're lacking in that, it does need to be addressed, called out in love, but in truth, and to be honest and have the integrity to say, look, man, man up in the best sense of that word, man up and take the responsibility that God has given you as a husband, as a father, or even as a boy, right? As a boy who's training to be a husband and a father. So I just wanted to throw that in.
And I love that too, because we're so much like everything you just said. It always sounds like it's such a negative reaction. It's like, why are you doing that? You're putting too much pressure. And what we're finding out about the boy crisis is, no, they're killing themselves more, and they're going to prison more because we've just told them don't do any of that. So we have the evidence in the pudding now. The past 40 years, we told them not to actually pursue goals. Everything you just said is toxic from the feminist world. And we've just tried their experiment, and it's terrible. The conclusions are terrible. So we need something else, and we need something more drastic. And I think I love what you just said, because it's like we're doing this not so that we can create toxic masculinity, but so that we can offer them hope, because they need something. They need that sense of purpose.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, I know we're gone.
Well, hey,
over.
I'm gonna play our outro music. Peter, it was really good to reconnect with you.
Yes. Good.
It's
so funny. I'm having my little IPA. It's almost 4:00 here, and good morning. Good morning,
it's
Brad.
12:26 for me.
Okay.
So I can't join you on that, but maybe one of these times we'll do a later night session, and you'll have to.
We've got a cigar. Let's smoke cigars one of these days.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Man.